When soldiers found themselves cut off behind enemy lines during the Second World War, they faced a kind of survival test most of us can only study through fragments of manuals and field reports. Food rations ran out in days, supply drops missed their marks, and capture meant interrogation or worse. Yet many soldiers, especially commandos, downed airmen and resistance fighters, managed to survive for weeks, even months, with almost nothing. They didn't have luxury camping gear or store-bought traps. What they had were small handmade tools, ingenious devices designed to catch, snare and sustain life using what the environment offered. These were the forgotten trapping tools of WWII, a quiet but vital part of the war's survival history that proved man's ability to live entirely off the land with next to nothing. This wasn't theory. This was the difference between dying hungry in a hedgerow and returning home alive. The origins of WWII survival trapping go back to military escape and evasion training. As early as 1939, Allied forces recognized that airmen and scouts operating deep behind enemy lines needed more than bravery. They needed bushcraft. British and American escape and evasion schools, such as those under MI9 and the US Air Corps, taught soldiers how to live invisibly off the land. Part of that training centered on the E&E tin, a compact metal box containing tools so small they could fit in a pocket, but powerful enough to trap food. One of the most ingenious inclusions was a coiled spring snare wire made of tempered brass or steel. It looked insignificant, but it was versatile enough to take rabbits, squirrels, or birds when set correctly. Unlike heavy modern traps, this wire was multi-use. Soldiers were trained to cut it into lengths, twist loops, and build trigger systems using nothing more than sticks, tension, and animal behavior. The goal was stealth and speed, set multiple traps, move on, and return quietly. Modern survivalists can still replicate this method. All it takes is a few feet of thin wire, preferably brass or steel, and knowledge of how animals move. A simple figure-4 deadfall or wire snare, properly placed along a known run or burrow, can feed a person in hours without revealing their location. Manuals emphasized positioning over power. They taught soldiers that the smartest trap wasn't the biggest. It was the one the animal never saw coming. For pilots shot down in forest, mountains or farmland, survival meant, well, improvisation. The British SOE, Special Operations Executive, and the American OSS, that's the Office of Strategic Services, both trained men to make traps from aircraft parts, parachute cord, and even bits of their own uniforms. A single spring from a plane's cockpit or a strand of shroud line could, become a trigger mechanism. And a broken tin ration can, well, that could serve as a bait cup. One particularly clever adaptation came from the Norwegian resistance, who taught Allied commandos how to build toggle snares from bent green wood and wire salvaged from telegraph lines. The tension-loaded design snapped upward when triggered, catching birds or small game cleanly. It could be built in just minutes, reset instantly, and left hidden. This same trap was later documented in Cold War survival manuals because, honestly, it required no special tools, just patience and a bit of careful positioning. Anyone practicing off-grid living today can apply the same principle. Just look for flexible saplings about as thick as your wrist, tie a snare line to the tip, bend it down, and anchor it with a trigger stick setup. The instant an animal steps on the trigger, the sapling releases, tightening the snare. With a bit of practice, you can build one in under 10 minutes and reset it endlessly. It's as effective today as it was 80 years ago. What separated World War II trappers from ordinary hunters wasn't the tool. It was, well, the observation. Training really emphasized studying the terrain, animal tracks and movement cycles. A misplaced trap was just wasted effort and energy, plain and simple. Scouts were taught to watch for compressed grass, droppings and entry holes, those telltale signs of established paths. Traps were never placed randomly. Instead, they were set along predictable routes, like fence lines, stream edges, or those narrow paths between thickets where small game travelled at dawn or dusk. This method, known as pattern trapping, allowed soldiers to maximise success with minimal resources. Instead of checking traps all day, they set them strategically and returned during feeding hours. In modern terms, it's really the difference between blind luck and proper fieldcraft. Even in urban environments, the same principle applies. Rats, pigeons and other pests follow specific patterns near food or shelter. By understanding routes and behaviour, you can trap efficiently without waste or, unnecessary exposure. Food scarcity during wartime meant bait was rarely available, if at all. Soldiers had to create it from whatever they found. Burnt grains from crashed trucks, scraps of bread, insects, or even the scent of grease from a mess tin were enough to attract curious animals. A major innovation was using scent camouflage. Some units learned to rub bait and trap parts with soil, grass or animal droppings to mask human odour. This wasn't just superstition, it came directly from, field observation. The same logic applies for anyone testing historical traps today. Animals are, really cautious of new smells, especially metal. Always mask the trap by rubbing it with natural materials and making sure it blends into the surrounding terrain. Back during the Second World War, a shiny snare wire could mean the difference between catching a meal or, going hungry for another day. The concept of invisible trapping, where everything looks and smells native, was a skill soldiers were drilled to perfect. Beyond feeding the body, these traps kept soldiers mentally stable. The act of building, setting and maintaining them provided structure and purpose when isolation could easily lead to panic. It was survival discipline disguised as a daily task. Many personal accounts from POW escapees and stranded commandos describe how setting traps gave them focus, something they could control in an uncontrollable situation. That mental aspect is just as critical today. In modern crises, whether natural disaster or grid failure, the ability to rely on your hands and knowledge restores confidence. Building a trap from wire and sticks isn't just about catching food, it's about reasserting control over your environment. It's the same mindset that kept WWII survivors alive long enough to be rescued. The legacy of WWII fieldcraft is that true survival requires skill, not stuff. When we look at the forgotten trapping tools of WWII, we're reminded that survival isn't about owning the latest gear. It's about knowing how to use the simplest resources to maximum effect. A few feet of wire, a knife, and an understanding of terrain proved more valuable than any ration tin. Soldiers turned raw, hostile landscapes into allies through patience, observation, and ingenuity. If you want to test these principles, start small. Carry a few lengths of snare wire, practice the toggle snare or figure-4 deadfall, and learn to read animal signs. Don't rely on gadgets, rely on understanding. Because when everything modern fails, these are the skills that still work. History's greatest survivors weren't the ones with the best equipment. They were the ones who could live off the land with nothing but what they remembered. If you found this deep dive into WWII's forgotten trapping tools valuable, subscribe to Echoes of Valor and share it with others who appreciate the intersection of history and survival. Every episode uncovers the real techniques our ancestors used to endure when the world went dark. Proof that the past still has lessons powerful enough to keep us alive today.